You may notice when you fly into the Ship Expo that up on top is a Cutlass. There's a reason for that. The Drake Cutlass has obviously become a very respected platform in the Star Citizen universe. It wasn't always thus. Drake originally was viewed as kind of like the bargain basement manufacturer, and it was kind of an afterthought, but it proved to be very popular within the player community. I think that there is to use a term, there is a silent majority of players in the Star Citizen community that aren't that vocal on the forums, that don't really kind of get out there all that much and, make their voices heard, that enjoy simpler, more logical things rather than, watching an entire design brief on a ship that talks about, we wanted to make sure we got the color accents just right, and, we want to make sure all the furnishings were correct and the liquor cabinets were fully stocked, and they want to know more about, does the ship do what it's supposed to do and what the core components of the ship are. And the Drake Cutlass is kind of an expression of function over form, and it has been somewhat of a triumph in that area. Now, the Drake Cutlass, of course, doesn't come without its own little controversies outside of the game, but I think overall I am glad that the original Cutlass was not changed as I suggested, and it was kept, and instead another ship was brought in to fulfill the obligations of the original light pirate fighter that can carry cargo proposal that the Cutlass did not ultimately fulfill. I think that the Cutlass was still a very good ship, and I'm glad that it persists in the universe. Now, sadly, the Cutlass Blue and the Cutlass Red are still yet to be manifest in the game, though I believe the Cutlass Red is supposed to come out within the next 2 to 3 months. It will finally be completed. These two variants were shelved to put those artists to work on things like the Constellation Phoenix, the 600i, or the 890 Jump, the luxury ships in the Star Citizen universe, because there was much more demand to fulfill all the luxury ship gameplay that we currently have in the game. As in none, unless of course you count sad people hanging out in front of Olisar saying, "Who wants to ride on my 890?" as luxury gameplay. The Buccaneer. Now, this is the ship that is the offshoot of the Cutlass. This is what is supposed to fulfill the light pirate fighter, meme. It is something of a controversy in and of itself, because some of the original promises, the ammo rack, the slight amount of cargo capacity, were not fulfilled, but in the end it has become something of a paper thin fighter, and there's a lot of people who are not fans of that idea. It is very easily damageable, though it is extremely fast and extremely maneuverable. It is the essence of a glass cannon, and you can see why it is that way. When you fly it, when you operate it, when you use it, getting hit is very annoying because the damage can be catastrophic. But I mean, to be fair and to be honest, you can see why it is that way, because when you're flying it, if it was more resilient, if it was just kind of, as close in resiliency as it is in firepower to something like the Hornet, you could see how it would very quickly become the all-out dominant champion in dogfighting in Star Citizen. It has that much firepower. It packs a huge punch. So if you can get your flying down and you get your maneuvering down, the gunnery on this thing has the potential to ruin people. Now, the wingtip cannons, of course, are kind of a meme themselves. They're kind of a joke, but in the future, with different types of guns and different utilizations for those guns being fully realized in the game and not just in the kind of hodgepodge way that they are now, I could see those being useful to a certain degree. But once again, time will tell. But that's the thing, is it's a live fast and die fast fighter. The Herald, the Herald is a dead ship in the current version of the game. There is no data to run, there is no hacking to be hacked, and unfortunately, even though, as I recently explained, after CIG had said that there were going to be no hacking missions for the Herald, and though talking about how desperately they wanted to do hacking other people's crime stats, they couldn't really see how, we can't really do hacking for the Herald because, there's just so few people who own the Herald that it wouldn't make sense to do a mission for these few people. Even though in the same show talking about how they want to do hacking because it would allow so many people to interact, these two things don't make sense. I feel that a tier 0 implementation of hacking should involve the Herald in some way. I mean, the knock-on effect for the community, and the very same show, CIG talking about sometimes we don't realize what the knock-on effect is going to be. It's like, duh, the Herald obviously would have a huge knock-on effect for the whole community. And it would make it a much more popular ship, which would in turn justify putting the effort into something like hacking, especially where the Herald is concerned. There's a lot of potential for this ship in the future. There's a lot of great things that can come with it. And I think that CIG continuously underestimates this ship and fails to realize that potential. And that is what has led to it being flyable for up to, I think, almost close to 4 years now. And yet, unable to do a single thing apart from being a personal transport in the Star Citizen universe. The future is going to be bright for the ship, but when we are going to see that future, I don't know. And yes, the images that you often see in my videos are of the asymmetrical Herald, because what you may not be aware of is when the ship was originally sold to the community back in 2014, there was a small yet vocal minority of players who preferred a symmetrical ship and said symmetry, it makes more sense, Scythe notwithstanding. They did not like the asymmetrical version, and amongst those were Chris Roberts, who just kind of said, oh, well, I asked the community and they preferred a symmetrical ship, so for everyone who already bought it, we're changing it to symmetrical. Because the Star Citizen community hates asymmetry. Oh, wait, what's this? It's the Corsair, an asymmetrical ship that has been lauded by the community. It's funny. The Corsair is kind of like the Cutlass on steroids. It is the Mega Cutlass. It is the Big Daddy Cutlass. And it holds a lot of promise. Now, of course, as with all Drake ships, it has its issues. And those issues being the side-facing cannons, which exist as nothing other than a reference to the original design brief on the ship, which discussed it possibly being a broadside ship. Those are just two little size 2 guns. You could just put them in a quad mount, put them on top of the ship as a turret, and they would make logical sense as a defense weapon for the ship. Where they are placed right now with their limited fields of fire, they are utterly useless, and so hopefully that is something that is going to be changed. I mean, the rest of the ship's firepower, which is considerable, is facing out of the forward end, and it promises to be one hell of a hard-hitting ship, and possibly a core pirate raider in the future, as something that kind of takes the Cutlass to the next level. There are so many good ideas in here, far too many to list, but ultimately I think that when the Corsair does get into the game, it is going to be quite an exciting platform to fly. Oh, and by the way, at the end of the large horizontal wing, that thing that looks like a gun, it's not a gun, so don't mistake it for a gun. That's also a frequent issue with Drake ships. And speaking of guns that aren't guns, we move on to the Caterpillar. At one time, the Raid Commander, the heavily armed pirate transport that later became the heavily armored pirate transport and then ultimately just became the transport ship. Now, what I mean is the two front guns that you can see displayed in many of the early art images of the Caterpillar and included in the early sales sheets of the Caterpillar, these were size 6 guns. So if you think about a ship like the Constellation, which has the big 4 gimbaled size 6 guns on it, this had 2. And it was kind of like a cheaper, more cargo-centric version of the Constellation. Now, the cargo pods themselves could be swapped out with different components. That was originally how it was sold to us, and it would be modular. Those cargo pods or other components that you can swap in have yet to make themselves manifest in the game. The weapons have, of course, simply become non-functional prongs sticking out of the front of the ship. And so ultimately, the pirate potential of this ship has somewhat been neutered. I would argue that those guns should be put back on in the Caterpillar, and not just for the pirate Caterpillar, but for all versions of the Caterpillar. I think it makes sense. And I feel that currently, if you're not going to do that, then the turrets themselves on the Caterpillar should be upgraded from dual mounts to quad mounts. I think that that would allow the ship to more closely, fulfill its original sail idea, the reason why it existed. I feel that it is wasted opportunity, though with the upcoming Corsair, an argument could be made that the Corsair kind of steps in and fills that role. So, you lose a little over here, but you gain a little over there. I feel, I own both ships, so to me, it has become less of an issue over time, though I do feel that the Caterpillar should kind of get those guns back. That's my personal opinion. Ultimately, I think that it will. I think that in the future, you are going to see a revisit of the Caterpillar, obviously when the cargo pods and all the other elevators and whatnot are made functional. There's a lot of work yet to be done on the Caterpillar, and I feel that that is going to be the time when the Caterpillar is going to see those things return to it. That is my opinion. That is not a fact. So take that with a grain of salt. Now, originally this ship cost like $225, and it was a steal at that price. Though a lot of things back then weren't that known. The ship that it has become is kind of the dominant trading platform in the game currently. If you're working by volume, it really is a powerhouse in the current game, and I think that it is going to continue to be a powerhouse well into the future. Obviously, things like the Hull C through the Hull E, things like that, the Merchantman, are going to dwarf this ship in terms of earnings potential, obviously. But as a stepping stone to those larger ships, I think the Caterpillar is always going to be popular. And when you pilot this ship, you realize that this ship is fast. I mean, ridiculously fast. It handles closer to a Cutlass. But when you kind of move into areas like Area 18, where gravity becomes an issue for so many of the big ships, it really isn't an issue for the Caterpillar. The Caterpillar handles it with ease, and it is such a stable platform that even landing it into difficult landing areas in the third person, you get used to it very, very quickly, and it's such a great ship to fly. It really, really is. I would honestly say that, like most Drake ships, some of them are kind of held back. There's a potential in the future for them to be good, like the Herald. But in general, I think that Drake is probably the most solid manufacturer in terms of the ships, how they're realized in game versus any other manufacturer currently. I think that with Drake, you do kind of get what you pay for, and it is, in the end, it's a damn good ship because no one's sitting there worrying about hot tubs and liquor cabinets. Everyone's worried about the ship actually being able to do what it's supposed to do. And most of the time, the ship really meets those requirements in a lot of the core areas that really make a difference in Star Citizen. And I think that that is what you really should be paying attention to when you're buying a Drake ship. It is not going to appeal to everyone, but I think that the people who really worry about the most important things in Star Citizen are going to see themselves looking at Drake ships. Anyways, that's the show for today. Wait, no, that isn't the show for today, because there's one more Drake ship, or, well, 1.5. The Kraken. Now, of course, the Kraken, which is the long-awaited pocket carrier in the Star Citizen universe. This is a ship that has been theory crafted as an empty slot in the ship lineup for so many years, and when it was finally filled with the Drake Kraken, so many people were overjoyed by this. This is not a ship that I own, and not because, well, we're going to kind of get into some of the upcoming controversy with this ship, and there is going to be a little bit of salt. Those people who remember some of my older videos and some of the things that I would say in this video and kind of miss those kinds of statements, you're about to get a heaping dose of that when it comes to the Kraken. Now, of course, the Kraken is a $1,400 ship. There's two versions. There's the original Kraken and now the Kraken Privateer, which sacrifices a little cargo space and a little storage space for, I think, space bikes to accommodate in a shopping bazaar within the ship. So I guess to sell your pilfered goods, you know, that sort of thing. And that's all well and good. Everything fine, whatever. It's a $1,400 ship, you know. It is what it is for those who want it, those who own it. Or if they're willing to pay the price, then that is that, you know. Who am I to judge? But where I'm going to kind of come down on this ship really hard, and like, there's a couple of things about this ship that really irk me to no end. And it is, I think, it is with this sale of the Kraken Privateer that things have really kind of come to a head for me personally when looking at this ship. And so I'm going to say some shit right now that I think where CIG is being misleading, and they are being they're showing a disregard for the community when they're asking for $1,400 for this ship. And I think that there are things that they need to clarify and things that they need to set in stone. Now you might say, well, the nature of game development, you know, things are up in the air. When someone's spending $1,400, bullshit. If you're making them a promise, then you keep that promise. And I feel that CIG is implying things with this ship that may not be true. First of all, in the marketing material of the new Kraken Privateer, you know, unleash the spirit of enterprise, and then they refer to it as the Kraken Attack Carrier. Now they have specifically stated that this ship is not, you know, carrying military grade components, but they're referring to it as an attack carrier, like an assault ship. It is a civilian component equipped ship. It is not a military ship, but somehow it's an attack carrier, and this is the privateer version of it that carries, you know, less cargo capacity, that sort of stuff, but it doesn't replace it with military grade components. It replaces it with a shop. Now, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe there are indeed military grade components now on the attack carrier privateer version. Maybe. I don't think so. I would like some clarification on that when I'm spending $1,400, because you're kind of misleading people. Like, this is a frontline brawler that also happens to carry other ships into combat. Is it really? Is it meant to go toe-to-toe with things like the Idris, things like the Javelin? I don't think that it is. But you're making it sound like some heavy attack ship. Like it's something like a Javelin or something like an Idris. Is it or is it not? That's what I would like to know. Because for $1,400, I feel that people deserve something of a guarantee in that department. Now, once again, we're hearing it referred to as the self-contained war machine, capable of taking on the most daunting adversaries. So, like, this was kind of like a commercial support ship before. Now, all of a sudden, it's a war machine. What the fuck is that? Where did this come from? Like, oh, you know, because, you know, people were kind of reticent about it when we were just describing it as a commercial vessel with some possible criminal uses in the background, something that you wouldn't want to take up on the front line, something that we've specifically said, but now we're calling it a war machine. So have we entirely changed the Kraken? Is that what the Kraken is now? Is the Kraken a war machine? Is the Kraken a frontline brawler? Please, you know, clarity, please. What is it supposed to be? Now, this stuff set aside, maybe that's what the Kraken Privateer is. Maybe that's an additional feature of the new version of this ship. Maybe it is a military grade version. People weren't people were a little bit cautious about the non-military version. Maybe this is a military version and I just missed the boat on that. Maybe, I don't know. Possible. Now, since the earliest days of the original Kraken to this version of the Kraken, we're constantly shown images like this of the Kraken parked on the surfaces of moons and planets. And obviously here it's opening up the market space to all the local residents so they can purchase goods from wherever they came from, off of the, the markets and the stores within the ship. But we've heard so much about how difficult it's going to be for these large ships to take off from planets and moons, yet we're constantly shown the ship operating from the surfaces of planets and moons. So is this ship, with this absence of vertical thrusters, is this ship able to do this, or isn't it? Are you going to guarantee it, or are you forgetting to show the armada of tow ships that are needed to get this ship off the surface of these planets and back up into the atmosphere? Is this ship intended to only operate in space like a lot of the large ships are supposedly only really meant to do, and only able to land on planets with quote-unquote great difficulty? Because you're kind of selling, with this image, you're selling an idea that you can do these things, and then to turn around and say, oh, well, we really didn't kind of like the way that flight model was working. We realized that it's been accepted as that was going to be the standard for years and years, but then we came up with a fun idea to change it right out from under everybody. With images like this, you sell an idea that it's going to do a certain thing, and for $1,400, it should do that fucking thing. It shouldn't be like, well, let's wait and see and all be surprised together. It either does or it doesn't. Now, I do like the Kraken. There's a lot of functional reasons why a lot of people would like the Kraken. We've talked about that in the very beginning. We said this was the obvious gap in the Star Citizen ship lineup that had been there for years. It was kind of like the elephant in the room. When are we going to get the pocket carrier? We were all very excited to see it. But the thing of it is that the marketing of this ship constantly shows it as this kind of like brawler. I mean, here it is tearing up an Idris, like just tearing the shit out of it. Yet at the same time, CIG is telling us, well, this is a ship that doesn't have military grade components. It's not really something that you're supposed to take into direct combat. It's just supposed to be, a support ship, or it's supposed to be a ship that kind of organizes the fleet and supplies the fleet that goes out and does these sort of things. Now, you could say, oh, well, it's like most marketing, it's kind of spiced up. We're just kind of doing it kind of like in the universe, it would be that way too, sort of thing. I would argue that when you're asking people for this much money, you should show them exactly what it's going to do. Yes, marketing does do certain things like this. In the real world and in the digital world, it would, make sense that it sort of follows those rules. But I think that when you're asking for so much money, you should be a little bit more responsible with that marketing, and a little bit more responsible with your promises to the people who you are asking for this money in the first place. And just kind of say, this is exactly what it's going to do. This is what we intend for it. And if we can't get it to this point, we're going to make some changes to try and fulfill that promise as much as possible. But when you're showing it brawling with Idrises and you're talking about it like it's an attack carrier, like it's a war machine, and then you're saying, oh, but it's only armed with civilian components and it's not really meant to engage in direct combat. I mean, that is a very mixed message. And you can see how realistically, if you don't approach this from, a detachment, detaching yourself from this kind of like, oh, well, that's how marketing works type bullshit. If you don't detach yourself from it and say, no, this is exactly how it's going to work, and, advertise it more responsibly, you're just creating problems for yourself down the road when people get this ship and say, why the fuck doesn't it do what I bought it for when I spent $1,400? You're just creating problems for yourselves. You have to be more responsible with your marketing of something like this. When you're constantly having to go out on video and talk to people and say, that's the nature of game development and things change, but you're kind of creating that expectation. You're fueling that expectation because you want to get the money. But at the end of the day, when it comes time to pay the piper, you're the first one to duck out and not pay the bill. So I don't think you really get the right to kind of sit there and say, oh, well, that's the nature of game development, because at that point it's a cop-out. You're just bitching out of your responsibilities. And with that, I am going to end this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. A little bit of extra salt for those who are fans of the saltiness of the older videos. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.